Chosen one, there is a quiet kind of confusion that lives inside people who feel different but cannot explain why. It is not the loud confusion of being lost in the world, but the silent kind that makes you feel like you don't fully belong anywhere, not in the life you're living, not in the expectations placed on you, not even in the version of yourself others seem to recognize. This is the beginning of an identity crisis that many deeply intuitive, purpose-driven, or what some call chosen individuals experience. It often begins early, sometimes in childhood, with a strange awareness that your inner world is larger than the environment around you. You notice things others ignore. You feel emotions more intensely. You question what others accept without hesitation. But instead of being understood, you are often misunderstood. And over time, that misunderstanding plants a dangerous question in your mind. Who am I really? And why do I feel so different from everyone else? For many people walking this path, identity does not feel stable. It feels like shifting ground. One day you feel deeply connected to a higher purpose, as if your life carries meaning beyond the ordinary. The next day you feel completely disconnected, wondering if you imagined everything. This emotional and spiritual tension creates an exhausting inner battle. You try to define yourself through roles: student, professional, friend, leader, but none of them fully contain who you are. You try to explain yourself through personality traits: empathetic, visionary, sensitive, but even those feel incomplete. It is as if your identity is always expanding faster than your ability to understand it. What makes this crisis more intense is the constant pressure to be normal. The world rewards predictability. It prefers clear labels and consistent behavior. But when you are wired to grow, question, evolve, and transform, normality can feel like suffocation. You may try to shrink yourself to fit expectations, pretending not to notice what you notice, pretending not to feel what you feel, pretending not to see possibilities others cannot see. But every time you shrink, something inside you resists. That resistance is not rebellion, it is alignment trying to protect itself. Yet when you don't understand this, it feels like internal conflict. You wonder why you cannot simply settle, why peace seems to require authenticity, but acceptance seems to require performance. Another layer of this identity crisis comes from isolation. When your inner experiences are difficult to explain, you stop trying to explain them. When others dismiss your perceptions, you begin to doubt them yourself. Over time, this creates a split within you, one version of yourself that senses depth, calling, and purpose, and another version that questions everything, fears judgment, and tries to remain hidden. Living between these two selves is exhausting. It feels like constantly translating your existence into a language that never fully captures it. And eventually, you may begin to wonder if something is wrong with you, rather than recognizing that something is awakening within you. The crisis intensifies when life begins to change you rapidly. Many purpose-driven individuals experience cycles of transformation that feel too fast, too deep. Interests change, beliefs evolve, priorities shift, relationships fall away, and every time you think you have finally found yourself, another layer emerges, asking to be understood. This repeated reinvention can feel destabilizing. Others may accuse you of being inconsistent, but what they do not see is that you are not changing randomly. You are shedding what is false and uncovering what is true. Yet even this process can be frightening, because each transformation requires releasing an identity you once relied on for stability. One of the most painful aspects of this identity crisis is the feeling of invisibility. Not physical invisibility, but existential invisibility, the sense that no one truly sees who you are beneath your roles, responsibilities, and outward behavior. People may admire what you do, but not understand what you carry. They may appreciate your strength, but not recognize the depth of your inner struggle. And when you are constantly seen partially, you begin to question whether your full self is even real. This is where doubt becomes dangerous. Doubt whispers that your sensitivity is weakness, that your intuition is imagination, that your sense of calling is illusion. And if you listen long enough, you begin to disconnect from your own inner voice. But the identity crisis of deeply purposeful individuals is not a sign of confusion, it is a sign of expansion. It happens because you are not meant to remain fixed. You are meant to evolve continuously. Most people build identity by collecting labels and protecting them, but people walking a deeper path build identity by releasing illusions and discovering essence. This process feels unstable because essence is not a static form. It is a living reality. It grows as you grow. It reveals itself in layers, and each layer requires courage to accept. There is also a profound loneliness in carrying potential you cannot yet express. You may sense that you are meant for something meaningful, but the path is unclear. You feel prepared for something that has not yet arrived. This creates a strange tension, like standing at the edge of a doorway that has not opened. Others may move forward with clear plans and visible milestones, while you move through seasons of preparation that no one else can see. During these seasons, identity feels especially fragile. Without visible confirmation of purpose, you may wonder whether your inner sense of direction is trustworthy. Many people in this state try to resolve the crisis by searching externally through achievements, validation, recognition, or belonging. But external confirmation never fully resolves internal disconnection. True identity cannot be constructed from outside approval. It must be discovered through inner alignment. And alignment requires stillness, honesty, and courage. The courage to accept that you are not meant to fit every environment, that you are not meant to be understood by everyone, and that your path may unfold differently than expected. The turning point in this identity crisis often arrives quietly. It comes when you stop asking, "Who should I be?" and begin asking, "What feels true within me right now?" It comes when you stop trying to maintain a fixed image and start allowing yourself to evolve naturally. It comes when you realize that identity is not a destination but a relationship with your own unfolding awareness. And once you understand this, the crisis begins to transform into clarity. Not instant clarity, but living clarity, the kind that grows with you. You begin to see that your sensitivity is perception, not weakness. Your restlessness is growth, not instability. Your questioning is awareness, not confusion. Your transformations are alignment, not inconsistency. And slowly, you stop resisting the very process that once frightened you. Instead of trying to define yourself once and for all, you begin to trust the unfolding. When this shift happens, something powerful changes. You stop searching for identity as if it is something missing, and you start recognizing identity as something emerging. You stop trying to prove who you are, and you start allowing who you are to reveal itself through how you live, choose, respond, and grow. The crisis does not disappear entirely, but it loses its power to destabilize you. It becomes part of your evolution rather than an obstacle to it. And perhaps the most important realization of all is this: feeling different was never the problem. Misunderstanding your difference was the problem. The identity crisis was never a sign that you were lost. It was a sign that you were becoming. Every moment of confusion, every season of doubt, every phase of transformation was part of a deeper process of alignment. Not alignment with expectations, but alignment with truth. So if you find yourself in this space, uncertain, shifting, searching, understand that you are not broken. You are not failing. You are not losing yourself. You are meeting yourself layer by layer. And identity, for someone who is constantly evolving, is not something you finalize. It is something you embody again and again with deeper awareness each time. The crisis is not the end of self-discovery. It is the doorway into it. As this awakening deepens, another layer of the identity crisis begins to surface, one that is even more subtle and more challenging than simply feeling different. It is the realization that the version of yourself you presented to the world for years may not have been your true self at all, but rather a carefully constructed adaptation. You begin to see how much of your personality was shaped by survival, by expectation, by the need to be accepted, understood, or simply left in peace. And when that realization hits, it can feel disorienting. Because if the person you have been showing the world is not fully you, then who have you really been living as all this time? This stage can feel like standing in front of a mirror that no longer reflects what you expect. Habits you once thought defined you begin to feel foreign. Dreams that once motivated you begin to feel hollow. Conversations that once felt natural begin to feel forced. You may notice yourself withdrawing, not out of sadness, but out of deep internal reorganization. Something within you is rearranging priorities, values, and perceptions, and this process requires space. But from the outside, others may interpret this as confusion, moodiness, or detachment. They may not realize that you are not withdrawing from life, you are withdrawing from illusions. One of the most difficult parts of this phase is grief. Not grief for something that physically ended, but grief for identities that once gave you stability. Even if those identities were incomplete or misaligned, they were familiar. They gave you a sense of structure. They helped you navigate social expectations. And letting them go can feel like losing pieces of yourself, even when those pieces were never fully authentic. It is possible to mourn what was never truly real, simply because it once gave you a sense of belonging. This emotional contradiction can be confusing. You feel both liberated and lost at the same time. During this period, many people try to rebuild identity quickly, just to escape the discomfort of uncertainty. The mind craves definition, it wants clarity, labels, action, but forced identity rarely lasts. When you rush to define yourself prematurely, you often rebuild using fragments of your old conditioning rather than emerging truth. And then, eventually, the cycle repeats, another identity forms, feels restrictive, and dissolves again. This can create the illusion that you are unstable, when in reality you are simply resisting premature closure. Growth requires openness, and openness feels like uncertainty. Another powerful experience that emerges during this stage is heightened self-awareness. You begin noticing your thoughts as they form. You become aware of emotional patterns you previously overlooked. You see how certain environments drain you while others energize you. You recognize when you are acting from authenticity and when you are performing. This awareness is transformative, but it is also overwhelming at times. When you see more clearly, you can no longer move unconsciously. Every choice feels significant. Every reaction reveals something about your alignment. And this level of awareness can feel heavy if you do not yet trust your inner guidance. Relationships often shift dramatically during an identity crisis of this depth. Some connections that were built on shared roles or expectations may no longer feel natural. Conversations may feel shallow where they once felt sufficient. You may find yourself craving depth, honesty, and meaning in ways you never did before. This does not mean you love people less. It means you are relating from a different level of consciousness. But this shift can create distance. Others may feel that you have changed, and they are right. You have changed. What they may not understand is that your change is not rejection, it is alignment. There is also a growing sensitivity to authenticity, both your own and others. You begin to feel when something is genuine and when something is performative. You notice subtle emotional undercurrents in interactions. You sense tension, hidden motives, unspoken truths. This heightened perception can make ordinary social environments feel exhausting. Small talk may feel draining. Superficial interactions may feel almost physically uncomfortable. And this can lead to further isolation, not because you want to be alone, but because you want to be real. In the midst of all this, you may begin questioning your life direction more deeply than ever before. Career paths, ambitions, goals, and long-term plans may all come under review. Not because they are wrong in a conventional sense, but because they may no longer resonate with who you are becoming. This creates a profound tension between security and authenticity. Do you maintain what is stable but misaligned, or risk uncertainty to live truthfully? This is one of the defining crossroads of identity transformation, and there is rarely an easy answer. Every path requires courage, either the courage to remain and transform from within, or the courage to step away and rebuild entirely. As this internal restructuring continues, you may also experience waves of intense clarity followed by periods of deep uncertainty. Moments will come when everything feels aligned, when you understand yourself, your direction, your purpose. These moments feel expansive, peaceful, almost luminous. But then just as suddenly uncertainty returns. Old doubts resurface. Direction feels unclear again. This fluctuation can feel frustrating, but it is part of the integration process. Clarity reveals possibility. Uncertainty strengthens trust. Each phase serves a purpose in stabilizing your evolving identity. Another subtle but profound shift occurs when you begin recognizing that identity is not something you create, it is something you uncover. This realization changes how you relate to yourself. Instead of trying to invent who you are, you begin listening for who you already are beneath conditioning, fear, and expectation. This listening requires stillness. It requires honesty. It requires patience. And perhaps most importantly, it requires self-permission, the permission to exist without constant justification. You may also begin noticing a growing inner authority. Not arrogance, not certainty about everything, but a quiet trust in your perception. You start valuing your intuition, your emotional signals, your sense of alignment. Decisions begin to feel less like calculations and more like recognitions. You recognize what feels true. You recognize what feels forced. You recognize when something resonates deeply and when something merely appears logical. This shift from external validation to internal alignment marks a major turning point in resolving identity conflict. Yet even with this growing clarity, the process is rarely comfortable. There may be days when you wish you could return to simpler versions of yourself, versions that did not question so deeply, feel so intensely, or perceive so much. But once awareness expands, it does not contract. You cannot unknow what you now see. You cannot unfeel what you now sense. And slowly, you begin to accept that your path is not about returning to certainty. It is about becoming stable within transformation itself. Eventually, a new understanding begins to form. You realize that identity is not a fixed structure but a living expression of alignment. It is not something you protect from change, but something that grows through change. And once you accept this, the fear of losing yourself begins to fade, because you understand that what is real within you cannot be lost. It can only be revealed more fully. You start living differently. Not dramatically, not all at once, but subtly. You speak more honestly, you choose more intentionally, you listen more deeply to your inner responses. You allow yourself to outgrow spaces that once defined you. You stop apologizing for evolving. And in doing so, you begin to experience something that once felt impossible, peace without fixed identity. A groundedness that exists even while everything continues to change. And perhaps the most liberating realization of this stage is that you were never meant to arrive at a final version of yourself. You were meant to live in continuous unfolding. The identity crisis was never a detour, it was initiation, a passage from unconscious adaptation into conscious embodiment, a movement from performing identity to living essence. So the confusion, the grief, the shifting, the questioning, all of it was part of learning how to live truthfully without needing permanent definition. And once that understanding settles into your being, the crisis transforms into something else entirely. It becomes evolution in motion. A life not defined by who you were told to be, but shaped by who you continually discover yourself to be. As this inner evolution continues, something even more profound begins to happen. Your relationship with uncertainty starts to change. In the earlier stages of the identity crisis, uncertainty felt threatening, like standing on unstable ground with nothing to hold on to, but gradually you begin to notice that uncertainty is not empty space, it is living space. It is the environment where growth takes shape, where intuition sharpens, where awareness deepens. Instead of trying to escape it, you start learning how to remain present within it. And that shift changes everything. You begin to understand that your old need for clear definitions was never truly about identity, it was about safety. Labels made you feel anchored, predictability made you feel secure, but now something deeper is replacing that need. A quiet inner steadiness begins forming, one that does not depend on fixed answers. You start trusting that you can move through change without losing yourself, because you are no longer defining yourself by static roles or external recognition. You are defining yourself by alignment, by what feels true, alive, and real within you moment by moment. This is when identity stops feeling like something you must figure out and starts feeling like something you experience. Instead of asking, "Who am I supposed to be?" you begin noticing, "Who am I being right now?" And this subtle shift brings an entirely new level of presence. You become more aware of how you move through the world, how you respond, how you choose, how you express, how you relate. Your identity becomes less conceptual and more experiential. It is no longer a mental definition, it is a lived reality unfolding in real time. But with this deeper awareness comes an unexpected challenge, responsibility. When you no longer live unconsciously, you can no longer pretend you don't know when something is misaligned. You feel it immediately. A conversation that once seemed harmless now feels energetically heavy. A decision that once felt practical now feels internally conflicting. A path that once looked promising now feels quietly wrong. This heightened sensitivity to alignment means you must make choices with greater honesty. And honesty often requires courage. Many people discover during this stage that living authentically is not always comfortable, convenient, or socially rewarded. Authenticity may ask you to set boundaries you once avoided. It may ask you to speak truths you once suppressed. It may ask you to walk away from environments that once felt familiar. And every time you choose authenticity over comfort, you reinforce a new kind of identity, not one built on adaptation, but one built on integrity. At the same time, you may notice a growing sense of inner solitude, not loneliness, but solitude. Loneliness feels like absence, solitude feels like presence. You begin to feel deeply connected to your own inner world in a way that no longer feels empty. Silence becomes nourishing rather than uncomfortable. Reflection becomes grounding rather than overwhelming. You no longer need constant external input to feel stable, because your sense of self is becoming internally rooted. This internal rooting brings a powerful realization. Much of your earlier identity struggle came from trying to be understood before you understood yourself. You wanted others to see you clearly, validate you, recognize your depth. But now you realize that true recognition begins within. When you see yourself honestly, without exaggeration, without minimization, without distortion, you stop depending so heavily on external understanding. You still value connection, but you no longer require validation to confirm your existence. Another transformation that often emerges during this stage is the integration of contradictions. Earlier in your journey, you may have felt fragmented, strong in some moments, vulnerable in others, confident one day, uncertain the next, deeply spiritual at times, intensely practical at others. These contrasts may have felt like evidence that you were inconsistent or divided. But now you begin to see something different. You begin to see wholeness. You realize that complexity is not fragmentation, it is fullness. You are not one-dimensional, and you were never meant to be. Strength and sensitivity coexist, clarity and questioning coexist, stability and transformation coexist. Instead of trying to eliminate contradictions, you begin integrating them. You allow yourself to be layered, dynamic, and multidimensional. And in doing so, your identity becomes less rigid but far more complete. As this integration deepens, your sense of purpose also begins to shift. Earlier, purpose may have felt like a distant destination, something you had to find, prove, or achieve. But now purpose feels more immediate, more present. It is not just something you do, it is something you embody. It is expressed in how you listen, how you respond, how you create, how you care, how you move through everyday moments. Purpose stops being a grand future event and becomes a living quality of being. This shift removes enormous pressure. You no longer feel that your worth depends on discovering one perfect path or fulfilling one monumental role. Instead, you begin to see that meaning emerges continuously through alignment. Each honest decision, each authentic expression, each conscious choice becomes an extension of your purpose. Your life stops feeling like something you must prove and starts feeling like something you participate in. Yet even with this growing peace, there are still moments when the old fears resurface. Moments when uncertainty feels heavy again. Moments when you question whether you are truly moving in the right direction. But these moments no longer define you. They pass through you rather than consuming you. You observe them, feel them, learn from them, but you do not build your identity around them. This is a crucial turning point. Earlier, confusion felt like evidence that something was wrong. Now confusion simply feels like part of movement. It becomes information rather than threat. And this ability to remain steady while experiencing inner shifts marks a profound level of maturity in the identity journey. You may also notice that your perception of time changes. In the past, you may have felt pressure to figure everything out quickly, to establish clarity, direction, stability as soon as possible. But now you begin to trust the pacing of your own unfolding. You see that growth cannot be rushed without distortion. Just as a seed cannot be forced to bloom instantly without damage, identity cannot be forced into premature certainty without losing depth. This patience creates space for something remarkable: self-compassion. You stop judging yourself for not having all the answers. You stop criticizing yourself for changing. You stop measuring your worth by how clearly defined your identity appears. Instead, you treat your evolution with respect. You allow yourself to be in process, and within that acceptance a quiet confidence emerges, not loud, not dramatic, but steady. A confidence that does not come from knowing exactly who you are, but from trusting your ability to remain connected to truth as it reveals itself. This confidence is flexible, resilient, alive. It does not break when circumstances change, because it is rooted in awareness rather than structure. Eventually, you reach a realization that reshapes everything. Identity is not something you possess, it is something you participate in. It is a living relationship between your awareness and your expression. It breathes, it evolves, it responds, and your role is not to control it, but to remain conscious within it. When this understanding settles fully into your being, the identity crisis no longer feels like a problem to solve. It feels like a sacred process you are learning to live with grace. The confusion that once frightened you becomes a teacher. The transformation that once exhausted you becomes natural. The search that once felt endless becomes meaningful in itself, and you begin to live with a new kind of freedom, the freedom of not needing to be finished. The freedom of being continuously discovered, even by yourself. The freedom of allowing identity to remain alive, fluid and unfolding just like you. And then, after everything you have questioned, released, confronted, and re-examined, there comes a stage that feels less like a breakthrough and more like a quiet settling. Not the kind of settling that comes from final answers, but the kind that comes from deep. The urgency to define yourself begins to soften. The pressure to figure it all out loosens its grip. You start realizing that the identity crisis was never asking you to solve yourself, it was asking you to allow yourself. This is where the struggle begins to transform into integration. All the fragments of who you have been, the child who felt different, the person who adapted to survive, the seeker who questioned everything, the version of you that broke down, the version that rebuilt, the version that doubted, and the version that believed, they no longer feel like separate identities competing for control. They begin to feel like chapters of one unfolding story. Nothing was meaningless. Even the confusion had direction. Even the instability had purpose. You begin to see that identity is not something you construct once and protect forever. It is something you continuously embody through awareness. And once this becomes clear, you stop fearing change as if it threatens your existence. Change becomes evidence that you are alive, responsive, growing. Instead of asking whether you are losing yourself, you begin asking whether you are living honestly within the version of yourself that is present now. There is a quiet strength that forms here. It is not dramatic or visible in obvious ways. It is the strength of inner coherence, the feeling that your thoughts, emotions, and actions are gradually aligning. You no longer feel pulled in opposing directions as intensely as before. When something resonates, you feel it clearly. When something does not, you sense the tension immediately. And instead of ignoring that tension, you listen to it. You respond to it. You trust it as guidance rather than dismissing it as inconvenience. This is also where self-trust becomes more stable. Earlier, you may have experienced brief moments of doubt followed by overwhelming doubt. But now, even when uncertainty appears, it does not erase your trust in yourself. You understand that not knowing does not mean you are lost. It simply means something is still unfolding. You no longer interpret every question as a crisis. Some questions are simply invitations to remain open. Another profound shift begins to take shape. Your need to compare your journey with others starts dissolving. During earlier stages, it may have been painful to watch others move forward with apparent certainty while you navigated deep internal transformation. You may have wondered why your path seemed slower, more complex, more inward. But now you see something different. You see that depth requires time, realignment requires disruption, and the work of becoming internally coherent cannot be measured by external timelines. You begin honoring your pace. You begin respecting the rhythm of your growth. And this removes a subtle but powerful layer of pressure you may have carried for years. The pressure to become something recognizable as quickly as possible. Now becoming feels less like a race and more like a relationship. A relationship with truth, with awareness, with presence. With this shift, something else becomes possible. You begin expressing yourself more naturally. Not as a performance, not as a carefully managed identity, but as an authentic extension of your inner state. Your words carry more sincerity. Your choices carry more intention. Your presence feels less guarded. You are not trying to maintain an image. You are simply allowing your lived experience to speak through you. This authenticity changes how you engage with the world. You no longer seek environments that validate who you pretend to be. You are drawn toward spaces where you can exist honestly, Some connections deepen because they are rooted in truth. Others fade because they depended on versions of you that no longer exist. And instead of resisting these changes, you begin allowing them. You understand that alignment reorganizes life naturally. There is also a growing sense of peace in not being fully understood by everyone. Earlier, misunderstanding may have felt painful, even threatening. You may have felt an urgent need to explain yourself, justify your evolution, make others see what you were experiencing internally. But now you recognize that complete understanding from others is not required for authentic living. Some aspects of your journey are deeply personal. Some layers of your awareness cannot be translated easily. And that is not failure, it is depth. You begin to live with a quieter kind of confidence. Not the confidence that announces itself loudly, but the kind that remains steady regardless of external reaction. Approval does not inflate it. Disapproval does not collapse it. It exists because you are no longer negotiating your truth for comfort. And then comes one of the most liberating realizations of all. You understand that identity is not something you must hold on to tightly. It is something that flows through you. Just as breath comes and goes, just as seasons change, just as life itself moves continuously, identity is part of that movement. Trying to freeze it would be like trying to freeze time. What you are meant to do is not preserve a fixed self, but remain conscious within your ongoing becoming. At this stage, even your past confusion begins to look different. The periods of feeling lost, disconnected, uncertain, they no longer appear as mistakes or failures. They appear as necessary dissolving. You could not discover deeper alignment while clinging to structures that no longer reflected truth. You had to experience instability to release false stability. You had to question everything to discover what could not be shaken. And this realization brings profound compassion toward your past self. The version of you that struggled was not weak. The version of you that doubted was not broken. The version of you that searched endlessly was not misguided. That version of you was doing the courageous work of transformation without fully understanding what was happening. And now, with greater awareness, you can look back with gratitude instead of judgment. From here, life does not suddenly become simple or predictable. You still evolve. You still encounter moments of uncertainty. You still grow beyond what you once understood. But something essential has changed. You no longer interpret transformation as loss. You experience it as expansion. Your identity crisis has become identity fluidity. Your confusion has become curiosity. Your instability has become adaptability. Your search has become participation. And perhaps the most peaceful truth you carry now is this: you are not a finished definition. You are a living process. You are not something to be finalized. You are something to be experienced, expressed, and discovered continuously. So you move forward differently, not trying to secure a permanent version of yourself, but learning to remain present with who you are becoming. Not trying to eliminate uncertainty, but learning to walk with it calmly. Not trying to reach a final understanding, but allowing understanding to deepen naturally over time. And in that way, the identity crisis that once felt overwhelming reveals its final gift. It teaches you how to live without needing to be complete, while feeling whole anyway.